Hello everyone, welcome to our special forum today, Our World, Shared Future. I'm Zhong.
I'm Qiuyuan. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been 10 years since China raised the concept of building a community with a shared future for mankind, and this concept seeks to answer the most fundamental question between conflicts and peace, unity and division. Where are all of us headed?
And the challenges the world is facing today show that this is more than just a political slogan that China proposed. It's a vision, and more importantly, a solution that the country offers at a time when real changes can only be made by joint efforts.
And today we take a look at how this concept reflects China's development views and built the world into a better place.
That's right. And we'll also explore some of the controversial issues surrounding this topic. We've got a great panel. Joining us in the studio are Ms. Zoe Zhang. She is the Secretary General of Sino-International Entrepreneurs Federation. Thank you for coming. And Professor Liu Baocheng, the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at University of International Business and Economics. Great to see you, Professor. And Mr. Thomas Pauken, Consultant on Asia-Pacific Affairs and geopolitical commentator. Thank you so much for coming in.
And joining us online today, Professor Victor Gao, the Chair Professor at Soochow University. We also have Professor Qu Qiang. He is a Research Fellow at Beijing Foreign Studies University. Everyone, welcome to our program today. For the first part of our discussions, I do want to have some of our guests elaborate on this concept, building a community with a shared future for mankind. Professor Gao, let me start with you. There is a fair amount of Chinese philosophy and Chinese thinking behind the inception of this concept. Philosophies like harmony is of paramount value, unity of man and nature. Professor Gao, tell us how the Chinese thinking and philosophies helped create this concept.
Thank you very much for having me. You are raising a very important question. I think for thousands of years, the Chinese nation have put a premium on several things. One is exactly as you mentioned, harmony. Harmony among the societies, harmony between mankind and the nature. All these are very important. And I think there is also a very important element that is, don't do unto others what you do not want others do unto you. All this means that harmony, unity, and peace and stability and working for the collective interests of everyone involved have always been put a premium to in the Chinese civilization for thousands of years. And I think this is probably the core of what China is now proposing. That is the community of shared interests for mankind as a whole, because we are living in a world where we really need to promote multilateralism. We need to treat everyone, every country, big and small, as an equal. We need to emphasize the equality between people and among nations, and harmony among all nations, not only between nations, between different peoples, but also between mankind as a whole and nature, because environmental considerations are increasingly important. We cannot do anything in our own capacity to the detriment of our neighbors, other countries, or nature as a whole.
Professor Liu, let me just follow up on that. How do we address the reality that when we promote this concept of building a community with a shared future, sometimes people go with it, other times people question the motives behind it? How do we address this reality here?
I think communication requires, number one, you have a good intention. So how to convince the good intention starting from your side, you need to bring the logic, you need to bring the best showcase. And second, you need to strategize some of the lofty conceptualization into operational type of action plan. And third is that you need to follow the logic. And you don't really paint a moon on a wall and let people to believe this is the good cake for you. So actually, China has been doing a lot of in the best practice by harmonizing the world. And so the big notion of the shared future is that okay, we recognize the human nature is that all of us are communal species. And as we get closer, we get more and more interdependent. Individual person, individual state is getting more and more vulnerable if they get isolated. And therefore, we need to work together to set up our own the survival skills, and then in the meantime to contribute to others. So as Victor Gao has mentioned, it's not only there to live and let live, but right now we need to live and help live. So that's something that we need to do a good approach. So I think China's rise almost took place in a sudden. So the world needs to accept some facts. And China also needs to readjust their own perception and their own communication with the rest of the world.
So this vision is strategic in purpose. And as we try to decode the visionary mindset behind this concept, one of the most important aspects is its diplomatic implications, right? What does it entail when it comes to China's foreign policy? Because China skeptics are saying, well, Chinese foreign policies are getting more and more aggressive and China's rise should be feared. But Beijing is saying, no, peaceful coexistence is what we want and here's what we believe in. We believe in a shared future for mankind. But really, Professor Qu, let me go to you for a sec. What do you see? How do you see China's foreign policy in the lens of building a community with a shared future for mankind?
Well, I think China is probably the most peaceful large country or major country in this whole world. Well, just take a look at from our history perspective. I think everybody could understand and agree that like 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, China is probably the largest country in the whole world. And it has overwhelming power against adjacent countries, its neighbors. But let me recall everyone. Is there any time that China tried to colonize the surrounding countries, even though when it has overwhelming power more than the other countries? No, probably not. For example, for the ASEAN countries, China created trade system with them, and even though China has a large army in this country, in its side, but China never sends a troop over foreign neighbors, and we send out our officials and the generals abroad, but with a trade fleet. It's a Mr. Zheng. And till now, just when New China was established in 1949, and you also see, even though we have conflicts, but still, China never interfered in other countries' domestic affairs. We never try to bring chaos and war to other nations. But on the contrary, China is the steady defender of international orders, defender of UN, a very active collaborator of the multilateral international organizations. And we've been sending our supporting team and foreign aid team to many other countries to help them to build infrastructures. And these are actually the very important evidence for Chinese peaceful foreign policy.
And Thomas, you once wrote in an article that China skeptics are hard to please.
Sure.
Anything the Chinese government does will be viewed in a negative light, that forecasting China's doom is smart thinking. You mentioned it a little earlier, touched upon this. Yeah. But what about this time, in this particular case? How is this vision being received by them?
Well, obviously, right now, I'm American, I'm a U.S. citizen, so I have to stay updated a lot on U.S. politics. And right now, China's image in the U.S. is very low, and it's going to be very hard for China to overcome and somehow improve its image. What I believe is that if China can focus on its economy, open up its trade and investments, and right now it is moving in that direction this year in a post-zero COVID era, you're going to have China more eager to promote its economy. And when it attracts more foreign direct investments, what you're going to see is perhaps when people start making money again, they'll be more happy with China. But in regards to diplomatic issues or politics, that is a hard sell for China to make to Europe, to America. So the main thing is just what is China good at right now? Right now it's very good at its economy. There is a major rebound occurring at this moment, and if more people are going to hear about it, and when they come to do business in China, this is going to be advantageous to China's image.
One thing I find worth clarifying is that common prosperity doesn't equal common solutions or common roads. Professor Gao, let me come to you now. China has always encouraged other countries to find their own development paths suitable to their respective national conditions. Just because China is leading the Belt and Road Initiative doesn't mean that China wants to get into their business. How has this helped to facilitate the Belt and Road mechanism?
Well, first of all, the Belt and Road Initiative is a global connectivity project, which eventually will be for the benefit of all participating countries and their people. Secondly, from the Chinese perspective, we do believe that every country is unique. They face very unique, extraordinary challenges and circumstances and opportunities. And there is no cookie-cutter solution which can fit to solve all the challenges facing different countries. Therefore, I think from the Chinese perspective, we will be very happy to work with each and every country in the world and to explore what is the best solution suitable for their own circumstances. And China wants to do this because over the past 4 decades or so, China has really been a pathblazer. We really created a lot of new paradigms, new models, for example, which we have benefited. We want to share our experiences with many other countries. And overall, I think there are several things which I would think have general application. One is the importance of peace. We always want to promote peace. The other one is the importance of stability. If a country is divided, for example, if there is internecine struggle among the different communities in one country, for example, you do not expect to have steady economic growth. And then we need to have a very scientific way of development. In China, we have always said development is the hard truth. So we want to have development. We want to help other countries to promote development, because only through development you can really expect to lift hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty, as we here in China have done. According to different estimations, China has uplifted more than 800 million people out of poverty over the past several decades. And we believe if China can do this, why not all the other countries? The importance of peace, stability, development, and always caring for different communities in the society, inclusive development, all these things, I think, form the core interest for what China now is proposing as the Belt and Road Initiative. It is not ideological, it is not political, it is really bread and butter basic issues that every country should care about. Helping your own people through international collaboration and cooperation. That's the future for mankind.
A very good point Professor Gao has raised. China has, in fact, huge incentives to work collaboratively with the global community. It's deeply dependent on global integration. That is something the West or other nations should not forget when they try to assess China's global governance ambitions. And speaking of that, this concept of building a community with a shared future for mankind also reflects China's belief in its global governments, right? Professor Liu, this could be some kind of fuzzy concept for a lot of people that they find hard to grasp in real terms. So put things into perspective for us. What does it mean really in terms of global governance? What kind of a global order does China have in mind in the coming decades? What kind of actions do you foresee China taking in the global governance space?
Well, China believes in the notion of harmony, and harmony is implemented by the fact that you treat each other with equal respect. You respect their will, you respect their choice, and more importantly, you respect the actual situation that each and every country is situated in. So trying to impose a template over the governance and over the way of management and over how the tribal culture can really follow. And even though you have good intention, the process is not really justified to really to lead to a good consequence. And that's many of the most mistakes that the United States has been making. And so China is there to provide not only the fish to help those who are really needy. We teach them the fishing skills like the Reuben workshop. we introduced in Africa as really gaining a great popularity by shipping the skills of the local people to the Chinese Oriental parks and many other industrial zones. And third is that China is not only giving them fish skills, but we open the market to buy the fish they have fished. So, by lowering tariff for all those produces, by completely eliminating all the import tariff for the least developing countries, and that's more that we are really committing to our WTO obligations.
And here's what I find interesting. So many people are trying to map out China's global governance ambitions, Thomas. Now, they say that Chinese leaders, they're ramping up their ambition for the global order. What are they afraid of? Other fears justified?
If somebody is talking to me and asking for my advice, I would say be careful about your terminology because it's easily misinterpreted. So instead of talk about global governance, you can say like your famous line, the shared future of humanity. That's a lovely line, and actually that works. And when you're talking about win-win benefits, and that's also a very successful approach because it's not just about China benefiting, but it's about others benefiting as well. And so what China needs to work more on is its communication on this win-win benefits, to say that China is not the only beneficiary of this. Other countries can benefit as well.
China's growing ability should be supported, right? They can present more opportunities rather than risks, and that is something that the West and other nations keep in mind.
Actually, that's, I still remember the Barack Obama when really he's commenting on China joining the global community. The notion that when China gets richer, U.S. gets stronger and the world gets more peaceful. And this is really the pattern that China is really operating on, but it takes time and more of our communication, to the world that we are really following this path.
China has been committed to that pattern, as you just mentioned, but there are, as Thomas raised repeatedly, there are trust issues, there are image issues, there are communication issues. Ms. Zhang, I do want to have you weigh in on this as well. We are trying to sell a concept, basically, and have everyone take in because we believe it's win-win. What do you think have been the challenges as we continue to promote this concept over the next 5 years, 10 years, or maybe longer?
As for my organization, so we are a community of entrepreneurs. So we actually organize a series of summit that would bring Chinese entrepreneur aboard and trying to use the business connection to deliver our message. And of course, during the summit, there was a lot of panel like this as well. So we're trying to tell how China has been evolved into and trying to share the successful experience with other countries. So we organize summits in development countries like Europe, but we also does it in RCEP countries and Africa. So I think with company communications and more business communications and cooperations, I think that will be in action for delivering the message.
Professor Qu, I want to come to you now because what's unique about the Chinese path to development is that it's made abundantly clear that it wants to share the fruits of its development with other countries. It does believe in a win-win situation, but it's also perfectly understandable that there are concerns when someone walks in and say, hey, let's sync up our development strategies. I think I have something to share with you that will benefit you. It's understandable that some people question whether you have ulterior motives behind your offer, as Thomas raised just now. How do you think we can go over these doubts and we can just work towards a goal that obviously benefits everyone without being overshadowed by some of those doubts?
Well, I think this is just the basic economics. A lot of people fail to understand the truth and essence of the globalization or globalized economy. They don't think it's going to be a win-win result because, according to the old paradigm, yes, it's like a cutting cake game. It's the same cake, and if you cut bigger, and then I will have less. It's not a sharing game. But you have to understand the modern economy. The nature of the modern economy is always the oversupply, not the overdemand, the oversupply. You always get the residue in our productions. That's the reason why we can see, even though we're still going through a up and downs in the whole world, but still for the whole world, for all people's living standard, everybody gets better than their ancestors. So this is the secret of a modern economy. When China says we're going to help the other country, we're going to achieve the win-win result, and the co-development is not a lie because it benefits China itself first. You see, in the globalized economy, when every country are entitled to do whatever they're good at, even though China maybe are good at maybe 1, 2, 3 things, but China can focus on its best doing thing, maybe the number one issue, and give the opportunity to number 2 or number 3 to other countries. And the result would be everybody benefit bigger from it, rather than China just take over 1, 2, 3 together. This is the basic economics. So China is the true helper of the whole world economy. Just look at what Chinese people are doing overseas, building bridges in ASEAN countries, building the railways in Africa, building dams, building the modernized power grid, and etc. And what's in return is that China can also benefit from these jobs. China can also benefit from the rising income in the faraway country, because in return, those people with higher income, they're going to shop, they're going to buy good things for themselves. And Chinese merchants and also can benefit from it. So the modern economy can really be a win-win. Everybody wins. It's very different from the old time. So it's time to abandon old thinking. That is, you have better life than I wouldn't. It's not. So truth speaks louder than the argument, and the scientific rules is always correct.
Qiuyuan, let's now move on to the second part of our discussions today, talking about regional connectivity and regional community. I mean, a shared future for mankind really represents a paradigm to encourage regional collaboration in social economic development. And a case in point is the RCEP freight trade deal, which went into effect early last year. Professor Liu, we are 1 year into RCEP. Are early results showing that this has consolidated regional connectivity? Would you say that?
Yeah, with 15 member countries representing half of the world population, 1/3 of the global GDP, and this is really a very decisive move against the backdrop that when WTO is now still moving like a snail, and regional integration is there to compensate the free trade that the world desperately need under such a challenging global environment, be it regional conflict, be it the pandemic, etc. And so this is a good example, and that is why the Asian countries are still there to serve the locomotive for global recovery and the global growth. And so over the past 1 year, since its real effect, we do see that there's been substantial reduction of tariff among all the members, and also the facilitation of custom procedures and certification of national origin, etc. So more importantly, I think it gave the business community, it's not only the membership business community, the world business community, to invest cross borders between these members, because there has been more harmonized operation. So this is really a very important move. But of course, the RCEP is a preliminary stage, and the members agree that they are going to further upgrade to further improve the investment environment and the trade facilitation program along its way.
Professor Gao, the COVID pandemic and geopolitical conflicts like the Ukraine crisis have really dented the global supply and industrial chains. We're seeing things coming back to normal gradually. How do you see RCEP play a bigger role in the post-pandemic era?
Well, first of all, I think RCEP is probably the largest free trade organization or framework in the world, just as Professor Liu just now mentioned some of its key features. Secondly, this RCEP framework is inclusive. It's not, something else as other countries would have advocated, which is disruptive, which is exclusive, for example, which is building small blocks, which is encouraging showdown and confrontation, for example. RCEP is inclusive, it includes every country in this part of the world, big or small, and it is meant to promote free trade. And we believe free trade will lead to greater prosperity and greater understanding among nations, and eventually it will contribute to peace in the world.
Right.
Now,
China has.
this is very important right now because the world is faced with fundamental choices of peace versus war and cooperation versus confrontation. Now, RCEP, together with Belt and Road Initiative, and also the Community with Shared Interest for Mankind, etc., all these major initiatives and cooperation frameworks are meant for peace and stability and growth. This sets themselves in sharp contrast with some other initiatives, for example, proposed by the United States or other Western countries, which are not meant for promoting cooperation, which are actually designed to promote confrontation and rivalry, or eventually may even lead to war. This is a critical moment in history where mankind need to make the choice and make the decision for peace rather than being dragged into the direction of war.
Thomas, let me give you a sec to respond to what's been said there. The contrast that Professor Gao mentioned between the United States and China, what do they stand for when it comes to globalism, peace, and growth? Talk to us more.
Well, I'd first like to address the RCEP, which I do believe is a very successful free trade agreement. And when I took a closer look into it while researching, I discovered that its emphasis was on making it easier for trade facilitation. It wasn't about enforcing labor standards on all the countries or even health standards. Yes, it'd be nice if every country had wonderful health standards, but sometimes they can't afford it. So with the RCEP, it focused just on promoting trade of goods from other countries. So you see China and Southeast Asia have booming trade figures last year, okay? So the reason I want to mention that is in regards to, for example, some concerns I also have about the U.S. is that if they don't always emphasize the business aspect of their trade agreements. They then say, oh, you have to comply with the labor laws of the U.S. or the EU labor laws, and they're talking to third world countries by saying that. There was also an issue where sometimes when the U.S. tries its own version of BRI. A few years ago, they had the Blue Dot networks, and then recently they have a new initiative. But the facts is it's too expensive. They're expecting the governments that they're working with to accept huge loans from Wall Street banks that charge high interest rates to pay for the U.S. projects, and then they expect those countries to comply with the same labor laws and the same wages that the U.S. companies have to do in the United States. That's not going to work. So what the United States has to understand is that every country has its own way of doing things, and I think sometimes Washington has this sort of attitude where it's my way or the highway, and that's why a lot of times many countries are starting to turn against that. So what Washington needs to do is sort of listen better to the other partners they're working with rather than dictating to their partners.
And Zoe, you come from a business community that built out international trade success. So how does RCEP affect you and your community since it took effect? How does it benefit you?
To our organization ourselves, obviously there's a lot of trade shows and a lot of events created because of the RCEP agreement. And for the entrepreneurs within our network, and we see a lot of beneficials like already emerging. For productions, like they have like lower costs for their imported goods, and of course their products will be actually cheaper. And whenever they export it abroad, it will be actually lower cost for the importers as well. So that's like the most straightforward things. And so I guess the RCEP is not only benefit for the nations, but also for business and also for peoples as well. So I guess for us, we as a consumer, we actually have like nice fruits from from maybe Thailand in a much lower price. And I guess for whoever's in Japan or Korea as well, they actually benefit from that as well. So I guess it actually has all those benefits already emerged from different perspectives.
Those are some of the real changes. Good wine, good food. Who doesn't want it?
Yeah, I do want to follow up on that as well. Professor Qu, let's have you talk about the benefits of RCEP as well, because we hear a lot about numbers and figures, but just in terms of how it helps people's lives, actual improvements on livelihoods. If you happen to be someone who work in the export-import industry in one of the member countries, how will your business and your life be impacted with the inception of RCEP?
Well, first of all, I would like to talk from the opposite side. If you don't have the RCEP or this tariff-free zone, for example, take a look at the UK. UK have the Brexit many years ago. People are saying that outsiders are taking away our jobs, jeopardizing our value of our work. But see, after many years of the Brexit, they do driven away lots of immigrants and foreign workers. But does UK people's, their living standard, the salary levels are getting higher? The answer is no, because all the tariffs will be like a wedge, putting into your income and your actual utility, your actual benefit of life. So with arrangement like the RCEP happening in China and the its trading partner regions, you will find out the tariff and the cost on the trade has been much lowered. And this lowered cost will turn into profit benefits. In return, it can create jobs in those countries. For example, China has been having hundreds of millions and hundreds of billions of US dollar trade increased between China and the ASEAN countries. And right now in Vietnam, they've been creating tens of thousands of jobs. In Philippines, because of the trade that's happening, so the fruit and fishes in the Philippines can now sell to China. It can be put on Chinese people's table with a much lower cost. But in order, Philippines increased the job in the fishery industry. And also take a look at the Malaysia and Thailand. Their durian are very, very famous, very delicious, but cannot be purchased by many countries because it's a fresh fruit, higher cost of the shipment, and also with not enough people to pick them up. But now, because we have this arrangement, so more and more can be shipped to China, shipped to Japan, and shipped to Korea. And therefore, the local farmers' income has to get increased. They can hire more hands, and they can have the machineries. And therefore, everybody wins from this deal. This is what we mean by the essence of modern economy. And this is the beauty of the free trade and the globalization.
Now, RCEP is no doubt a mega deal, but a lot of people still consider this as Beijing's counter to America's influence in the Asia-Pacific region, even though the negotiations are led by ASEAN countries. Professor Gao, some say that this RCEP deal is a weaker trade deal compared to CPTPP. What's your assessment?
I don't think so. I think in the world of today, we need to be inclusive rather than exclusive. In terms of RCEP, it's based on one premise, that is, every country within RCEP is entitled to do whatever they decide to do within their own country, for their own people. Now, we know for sure different countries differ dramatically in terms of endowment, in terms of their current challenges and opportunities. For example, when you talk about labor conditions, it differs a great deal. I don't think it is right to impose one same standard on all countries in the world or within RCEP or in the Asian Pacific region, for example, because this same standard will not work. And for any country to catch up with the standards right now prevailing in the developed countries, it may take decades, if not even a couple of centuries. How can you disadvantage these member states to start with by imposing a higher standard on their way of work, on their way of life, because these countries face completely different challenges and opportunities. Therefore, I think RCEP is the right thing. Now, when you talk about CPTPP, China is also applying to join CPTPP, right, and it has higher standards, for example, especially in terms of intellectual property rights protection, labor unions, for example, which I think China decides to apply to join CPTPP, even though China need to really overcome a lot of hurdles within China itself. So I would say let's do different things together. But the key issue is let's promote inclusiveness rather than exclusiveness. The world does not need to be divided into opposing blocks, for example, or artificially carved out blocks which are meant for rivalry and confrontation. I think the world will be better served if, for example, as China is doing, to emphasize the future of mankind together with the shared value. This is the better way because this is, in essence, inclusive rather than exclusive.
Your thoughts on this, Thomas? What would you say to people who are saying that, this deal, the economic benefits of it are modest and they're going to take years to materialize, and that, this is a geopolitical win for China instead? What do you think?
Well, I mean, already you see the benefits between Southeast Asia and China trade already. Sometimes in these situations, I actually agree with my good friend Professor Gao that basically RCEP, I actually believe, is a better agreement than the CPTPP. I think the problem with the CPTPP is that it imposes too many restrictions and rules on all countries. And also you have to take into consideration as well the drugs, the medical care cost. When you enforce the patents on the drugs, right now in America, one of the biggest problems that many ordinary Americans have is paying for drugs if they get cancer or if they have some type of terrible chronic disease. Okay, so the reason they have to pay high drug costs is very simple, because the US government has strict rules on the patents, and that creates high drug prices. So what happens if you impose those same rules on other countries and they have to pay high prices and then all the generic drugs get kicked out? See, so what I'm trying to say is that countries that are trying to negotiate the CPTPP have to really think about all the issues before jumping in. It's okay to sign up and say we're going to have negotiations, but they really need to think carefully about all the issues, because it's quite possible that this is something that will only benefit US companies or major multinational companies and will cause many small companies to go out of business. This is a very key, this is something very important that many countries have to think about.
Yeah, some countries tend to overlook that. And
Sure.
China applying for CPTPP, Zoe, is that something that your community are watching out for? What do you expect to happen?
I agree with Thomas. Actually, for some of our members, especially SMEs, I think RCEP, when they emphasize trading and have less, standards for including labors and IP, it actually make it easier for them to actually including in this agreement. So it's not like we are avoiding the CPTPP, but it's definitely not really leading or driving by ASEAN and not really in the focus of our benefit. And for the RCEP, I think that with the agreement and with the development of agreement, we're actually seeking a border and more deeper cooperation with the member countries.
And now I do want to move on to the Belt and Road Initiative. This marks the 10th anniversary of the proposal of BRI. Professor Gao, how does it bring life to the concept of building a community with a shared future for mankind?
I'm a firm believer in this initiative because I do think mankind should realize that there is only one world and there is only one earth that all of us share together. And the mankind is very diverse in its composition, and different groups, different countries, different nations have different traditions, ideologies, for example, political systems and their culture, which all need to be respected. And this initiative from China really is promoting inclusiveness and mutual understanding. And we want to initiate this common actions together to make sure that mankind as a whole will benefit from enhanced international cooperation because we are facing with the same future eventually, regardless of our differences. And only cooperation and mutual understanding can help us to enhance peace and prevent war. This now is becoming very crucial because there is really a crossroad coming up, leading either to greater peace or more dangerous wars. This is the time for all countries, every one of us, to be keenly aware of the importance of peace, stability, and development, rather than, taking dangerous steps to go to war, confrontation, rivalry.
Professor Gao, can I have you take a look at the prospect of the Belt and Road Initiative in the years to come? Because most people know the Belt and Road Initiative as a mega infrastructure building, connectivity, increasing kind of project. Going forward, we have witnessed the scope and meaning of the Belt and Road Initiative expand over the years. How do you look at its potential?
Thank you very much. I think when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, we need to remind all of us of what China has achieved in terms of infrastructure over the past 4 decades. China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative because we achieved a huge transformation of our own connectivity projects, and we as a nation benefited from such complete transformation. We promoted Belt and Road Initiative because we want to see all the other countries will benefit from enhanced connectivity of all kinds. You're talking about railway connections, highway connections, airports, seaports, and eventually financial connectivity, technological connectivity. This connectivity in an enhanced way will help all the countries, because this is the only right way for you to promote the fundamental interest of your own people. And I'm a big believer in the Belt and Road Initiative. And personally, I have no problem when I saw EU coming up with its own connectivity project. I just hope their version of the connectivity project will not be politicized, will not carry too much of an ideological color to it, for example, because what the people, especially people in the third world countries or emerging markets, in Africa, Latin America, you name it, in Asia in general, they need high quality connectivity projects rather than ideology or Cold War mentality. Let's work together to make sure that people throughout the world will benefit from greater connectivity, and this greater connectivity will lead to greater prosperity and peace.
Professor Liu, what would be your response if someone asked you, is the Belt and Road just about infrastructure building? Because the projects undertaken so far, let's be honest, have been, highways, bridges, that sort of thing. Help us broaden our horizon here. What will this Belt and Road Initiative look like going forward? Is it only limited to infrastructure building?
Well, infrastructure, 2 types of infrastructures, the hard part, like ports and railroads and airports, etc. They are also very necessary. The other is the soft infrastructure in terms of the internet connectivity, satellite accessibility, etc., for communication. But this is really the base, which is important because if you really, set up a fruit farm in part of Africa and then you do not really have the right road to ship it, and then that's quite a pity. Actually, in many of those corners of the Belt and Road countries, they continue to suffer from the problem. And of course, I think the best approach is the capacity building, because only people have the right vision, have the knowledge and skills. They are able to work on their own, because China is not there to raise their reliance over China. Actually, if we are trying to make them to stand on their own feet, ensure that they go for their own prosperity. Actually, I visited many of those industrial parks in Africa where Chinese investment are really booming. And the Chinese employer said, as long as they learn some more skills, I double their salary. As long as they are able to communicate with our guidelines in Chinese, and we will be very happy. But in the meantime, that also requires more of the capacity building for the Chinese investors over there, because they don't speak the local language, and They also need to be more adaptive to the local culture. For example, you cannot really run the Dunkin' meat in many of the African countries, even if the Chinese people, some of the Chinese people love it. So it's a mutual adaptive process, but in the end, it is really to support the self-reliance and self-prosperity over there. And of course, China is also, many Chinese companies are paying some big bills to learn, because before the Belt and Road the initiative, they never visited that road, the country or the park. And now they gradually are learning with skills, with more knowledge, and also with how to collaborate with the local partners in connectivity with the global business community, so that they can really shape their supply chain.
It's a learning curve for Chinese enterprises and for the Chinese government as well. But one thing when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative that we cannot shy away from is the notion of debt trap, right? Thomas, your thoughts on this? China has long been accused of pursuing debt trap diplomacy. Myth or truth?
Well, obviously, the key challenge of the Belt and Road is you cannot make it a charity project. And you have big projects of infrastructure, of bridges and roads. And if you just turn it into a charity project, it could be a lot of corruption, okay? So the challenge of the BRI is actually that issue of what are going to be the benefits for the people who invest into it or put loans into it.
If Thomas, lent me money, and I couldn't return, is it his credit trap or my debt trap? So I think the notion is wrong in the first place. And second is that Chinese companies, they more follow some of the political lines, and they are not really doing enough sufficient the due diligence on commercial basis. I think that's one of the reasons that Zoe may agree with me. And the other is that the local shocks are really there to be unpredictable. For example, the civil war, the flood, and this is really totally beyond the control, of anybody, particularly the Chinese investors, and also the some of the local governance. There is bureaucracy, corruption, and etc. So this is something that China is stuck in a dilemma. On one hand, we do not really want to meddle with their domestic politics. And on the other, we have actual assets. We have actual operation over there that are being adversely impacted over there. So in the end, I think we need to really segregate what is really charity work, which is also very important and China can do, and what is really commercial considerations. So they have different rules, they have different notions to serve.
And when you look at real projects in the recipient countries, evidence supporting the notion of debt trap is actually quite limited. For example, in Malaysia and Sri Lanka, two of the most widely cited so-called victims of BRI system, most of the controversial BRI projects, they are actually initiated by local governments as they were pursuing their own domestic agendas, and their debt problems mainly arose from the misconduct of either local elites or, some Western-dominated financial markets, Professor Qu.
Yeah, I think, let me add first.
Yeah, sure.
They trapped more of the global investors from the Western countries and also the global institutions like World Bank and IMF rather than China. China only takes 13% of the total debt portfolio of the entire Africa. So there's been too much exaggeration over the China's involvement in the debt portfolio in Africa. So this is untrue.
Yeah, Professor Qu, before we go to you, I do have some data here. Let's see if those data helped to support what Professor Liu just said. The World Bank estimates that in the next 7 years, only 14% of developing countries' total debt payments will go to the Chinese government and commercial institutions. What do these numbers tell us? We're talking about, of course, the volume of the debt here, but also I think one issue is when China talks about win-win, it often emphasizes the win for the other party. But this, of course, is an investment, and China expects returns on its investment involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. Professor Qu.
Okay. First of all, I agree that for China, our debt to the foreign countries, or as a debt holder to foreign countries, I think China is still a small player in the whole world. international financial organizations and developing nations are still holding the bigger share in the debt to the developing nations. That's for one thing. And also, please just to note one fact that China never said or never blamed a foreign country to invest in China or borrow money to China when China was like 40 years ago was still in a developing stage. Why is that? Because the debt, the word can be tricky because different nature of debt can have very different influences. For example, if the debt have a very long duration, let's say 20 years or 30 years, and an interest rate can be low, for example, 3% or 4%, then we call it a friendly debt. Because, well, just to think about some daily common sense, anyone who would like to lend you money for a long time with a low interest rate, it must be a relative or your dad or mother. Other people would lend you even a little bit money, right? But when it gets dangerous, because sometimes the loan can be very high interest rate and the duration can be really short, and then you're facing a loan shark situation. And that debt can be very dangerous. But just take a look at the general picture. But when China's been cooperating with many other countries, it's always like half commercial or half pro bono type. So the duration can be very long and interest rates are usually very, very low. It's within the framework of a multilateral development agency. For example, it's been anchored to the interest rate of ADB of the World Bank, or sometimes it's even lower than the support from the IMF. So we can call it a friendly support. China used to be the beneficiary of this kind of financial support from many developed nations. And to be very frankly, recently I heard a lot of friends in the multilateral cooperation in China. They've been blaming that. They've been saying that, because China has been developed, so foreign aid or foreign support, financial support to China has been cut to fewer and fewer. So, when the country has been developing, financial resources is always very precious. Even when China has hit the current size and development stage, it still yearns for the financial resources. So you have to think about the full picture and do not be led away by some misinterpretation.
So I guess the takeaway is that China is facing some kind of pushback, but it's to a much, much lesser extent than what is widely believed there in those countries about BRI.
Yeah, and I don't think when China was on the recipient end, as Professor Qiuyuan said, I don't think China ever said that we had been set up with a debt trap just because of the money that China, the friendly support China was receiving at the time. Ms. Zhang, can we have you weigh in on this as well? How do we maybe go around this trap talk and make good work in the future?
Okay, so from my perspective, because since I actually organized forums in Africa for over 10 years. So I can see, to start with, the investor from China has more systematic. It has more rules, and for example, that for state-owned companies, when you invest in African countries, you have to put 80% localizations and including local labors and etc. So the whole system has been built up and developed over the years. And secondly, we can see whoever goes to the BRI projects, it has been more professional as well. In the investment side, because we're talking about debt trap, we're actually seeking more social related projects, and secondly, regardless the AIIB or the CAT fund or other Silk Road fund, when they do the investment into Africa, they all have been done by all those professionals, and it's actually a project which the investor will see actually benefit for both China and Africa. So from both from the national side and also the professional side. So I think I don't believe this is a debt trap anyway, and I think I will see with all those professional and beneficial projects goes on, and the global will see that as well.
Professor Liu, you have something to add?
I think now, after 10 years of operation, we have achieved huge success, but mixed with many of the lessons we are learning. And fortunately, we are quick learners. One is that one way forward is to streamline the different responsibilities of different players. So Chinese government has been making too much of the noise, and actually much of the work should be handled more by the business community. And the other is that the civil society also need to play an important role in building the social trust. So three players that one is there to pave the road, that's the government. The other is that the businesses are there to drive the car, and the NGOs are there to say the hooray. So I think that's one approach. The other is that through the many of the Chinese businesses I have investigated and visited in Africa, and how do they really prevent what I call the Chinatown syndrome? And they tend to hurdle. They are doing good stuff both for the community and also for the quality of the products. But they have less communication skills, and they are more fear of making some of the politically unfriendly stuff. So that's something that they need to be trained. And third is that we need to trust more of the global financial institutions. Right now, actually, we are doing it. Like the BRICS Bank, we are trusting. The AIB, we are trusting, instead of doing like a lone wolf. So eventually, we need to work together more with the Paris Club, with more of the multilateral communication, the financial institutions, to really to shape the common framework for the debt treatment.
Final remarks over to you, Professor Qu. We're running out of time. Where do you see the BRI in the coming decades?
Well, I think BRI is making a lot of progress. I just like our dear fellows has mentioned. Localization has been really great. Maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you see the Chinatown syndrome. But right now, well, according to my visit to many BRI countries and their companies funded by Chinese people or by multinational people, you will see the environment can be really diversified. You see Chinese girls wearing a shari, working in an Indian environment. And also you can see in Vietnam, in Thailand, and in Indonesia, the full office are filled with local employees. So there's a learning curve. Things are changing. Chinese people are becoming more adapting, and localization are getting better and better. And I do agree, we are not very experienced in international communication, because China used to be enclosed like many years ago. But now, since China's been going out, I think all those problems has been improving and been changing. And you see, this is going to be a great help for not only Chinese people, and also there's going to be a learning curve for the local country. And I do believe the BRI is going to be a great opportunity for not only China, but also for many other countries, our partners in the BRI project. Because just imagine this, like building the bridges, building highways, they requires technology, requires funds, requires labors, and etc. So we have a joke around us that says, the current generation of Chinese people have all the willingness to go out, to see the world, help the other people, and we have enough funding to do so. And more importantly, they would like to do the hard and arduous job, working in a foreign country, building the highways in there, and doing all the construction job. But with this generation and with this drive has been gone, and any other opportunities to find such projects, to go to the foreign countries to help the foreign people to build the things they need. I don't think that's going to be much easier, because when America developed to a certain stage, when UK, when Japan developed to a certain stage, what they used to do has already been slowing down. They've been sending out the projects or construction teams to foreign countries. This phenomenon becomes less and less. So I think we really need to catch up with the trend of Chinese development. It's going to be a great opportunity.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have. Many thanks to our guests online and joining us in the studio for this thought-provoking discussion. Hopefully, we've all gained a better understanding of China's vision of building a community with a shared future for mankind. Where does it come from and what kind of impact it's going to make in the future?
And where it is headed for sure, too. And some people dangle the idea of decoupling, but that's really not a choice for China. China is a part of the world. China's development needs the world just as the world needs China. China and the world are a community with a shared future.
That's right. CGTN will continue to bring you special forums, so stay tuned for that. I'm Qiuyuan in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching.
I'm Zhong. We appreciate your company and see you next time.